Welcome to the Global Town Hall. This is the last Sunday in February. And of course, as you may know, Project Save the World hosts a Global Town Hall at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, US and Canadian Eastern Time, on the last Sunday of every month. And we invite people who are activists or researchers working on various global threats around the world to come together and talk about what's on our minds. This time, of course, since the war in Ukraine is going on, it is almost certain that what we will talk about is that particular conflict. And so we have people who've already come together and begun discussing this. I hope that you will watch. And if you are interested in something someone says, you're welcome to go to the website where we will post this. It's episode number 419, and it's on our website, tosavetheworld.ca, or it will be when I've edited it and put it up in a few days later in the week. And below each of the video showing screens, there's a place called the comments column for people to enter their own thoughts and reactions. If you agree or disagree or have additional information relevant to something that somebody says here, please go there and post it. And if you see something that somebody else has written there, you're welcome to reply to it. So I will look forward to seeing you there, and let's see what people are talking about. I actually didn't turn on the camera right at the beginning, so we missed a few minutes of the show, but people are already gathered and having a good conversation.
So whatever his reasons, I disagree with them.
Okay, Kelvin. Does anybody else know about this? What you're saying, really, Abraham, is very provocative because it means that you're taking a position that sounds very consistent with what the Russian, what Putin is saying, that he's just simply trying to rid Ukraine of its Nazi and drug addicted leaders. Which is a bit over the top.
I use, or at least I get my information from a lot of documentaries. There were two on last night. One was very recent about Putin, and the other one was an older one from 2015 about Putin. And there was a lot of information there, but they were both very biased against him, you know, that he has nothing redeemable. He's just all, out for himself, and his aggrandizement and all that of the nation that he wants to resurrect. I just want to know if there's any, should I believe any of this? I have nothing to gauge it against. It's just, it's very hard. Like, you hear the media, like, for instance, when Syria with what's his name, Bashir al-Assad. Some people said he was a hero and other people thought he was an evil man, and I personally didn't have any good to say about him, but I was trying to understand why is it that some people can see good in him, and I want to know about Putin, because I think the media tends to just give you one view, right? Mm-hmm. The main media, I mean.
Yeah.
So is there anybody who can give me or enlighten us about, does Putin have any concern at all for his people? Does he care what happens to them, or is he just?
No, he doesn't.
I didn't think so, but.
Well, the whole point is to protect Russia against NATO, which is expanding in the direction of Russia. That's what he thinks. He considers.
But is it for himself? Is it? Does he care how many people die? And
no, all the Russians have a deep ingrained, fear of European expansionism into Russia. This is, happened twice now. Mm-hmm. And then there was the invasion, during the Civil War, including Canada invaded Russia during the Civil War of 1918. So, like it's, a common cause, in Russia to defend itself, against any external aggression like that. And NATO armaments, being pumped into the Ukraine in order to attack the eastern territories, it's unacceptable.
I mean, it's not deniable that there is an issue there, but it isn't the kind of issue that's being portrayed by Putin, nor would I say that the NATO question is entirely what's at stake here. I mean, it's one of the factors involved in it, but there's also the idea of a greater Russia, and there are many religious sort of connections to what's going on there as well. The last couple of years, there certainly has been coverage of far-right vigilante groups using intimidation and violence to advance their agendas within Ukraine. And that's something that, for example, Josh Cohen, writing for Reuters, reported about a couple of years ago and has written a few other pieces about. But equally, more recently, Jonathan Deckel-Chen, who's history professor at Jerusalem's Hebrew University, did a piece for Associated Press. And he concludes, in terms of all the constituent parts of Nazism, none of that is in play within Ukraine from his perspective. So there are disputes about that, but it's undoubtedly the case that there are issues and problems there of racism, of the activities of far-right groups and so on. There's also, of course, the bombing campaigns connected with the separatists and that sort of thing. But on the other hand, the idea that Putin is sort of using this as a campaign against Nazism, denazification and so on, is an excuse for his own wider ambitions, which I think are very much to do with a greater Russia, with his role and status in the world, certainly with his own security issues and so on. Again, not saying that there isn't an issue there, but absolutely none of this excuses what's going on at the moment, which is absolutely horrifying. But I think simply to try and use claims about Nazi and far-right groups in Ukraine to somehow suggest that this is an acceptable action is completely mistaken.
From reading the news, etc., it seemed that both sides were not listening to each other, were not negotiating, were putting up preconditions which prevented negotiating. I mean, from the Russian point of view, I can see where Putin is coming from. It's sort of the Cuban Missile Crisis in reverse. But at the same time to be going in and actually destroying the country now, I mean, this is terrible. And so certainly heart goes out for the Ukrainian people right now. And I think that, the solution is obviously negotiation. But unfortunately, it seems that, once again, nobody's listening. They're putting up preconditions. Putin's saying it has to be in Minsk, and the Ukraine is saying no. Any other place but a place that's shelling them, which just seems to be, perfectly logical. So I know certainly various organizations. I'm with Rotary International. They've come out with a statement which is nonpartisan, and trying therefore to bring the two sides together for negotiation. But I think that the problem has been NATO and Russia have been using the Ukraine as a pawn, and both sides have been playing chicken, and now Putin has moved ahead, and it's up to really NATO to back down. And the trouble is, once again, the arming everybody else. Once you start arming everybody, then the risk of using those arms goes up. And again, from my point of view, we're also in a very dangerous spot because of the nuclear power. There's 15 nuclear power plants in the Ukraine. Ukraine gets half of its electricity from nuclear power, and it's sort of ironic that nuclear power stations need electricity for them to function. And so you could either have a direct attack, you could have an accidental attack, or you could simply cut off the electricity to the nuclear power stations, and then they would have a meltdown. And all of these nuclear power stations are much older than Chernobyl was when it melted down. The amount of radioactive waste that's around these places is much greater. And so the risk of radiation is huge right now. And of course, that could affect a lot of Russia as well as a lot of Europe. So that is very much a risk right now, is simply the nuclear power stations.
I've read something about that there was actually an increase in radiation in the vicinity, but this was just one little report. Has anybody seen any update on that or further information?
Yes, radioactivity at Chernobyl was reported to have gone up after the Russians took it, but then it was reported to have gone down again. So I don't know what the real situation is.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Chernobyl is encased in concrete, a sarcophagus. The problem is that you have all these heavy tanks going by, and whether that will crack the concrete and then release radiation that way.
Oh dear. I hadn't heard anybody say that. That's pretty scary. Let's see. We've got Bill Lycombe in California. I want to give everybody, all the newcomers, a chance to say something before we go back to anybody who's already spoken once. Bill, how's everything from your point of view?
Well, my first take on this was that Putin was reacting as from a stance of paranoia against the West, and so one of the things that, if that's so, then he's taking what he thinks is a logical step in the Ukraine to block the West, NATO, from taking any more territory that he looks upon as being a threat to his sovereignty. And that's all I have to say.
I'm appalled at what has happened, of course, but I'm actually surprised that it happened. I didn't expect it to happen. But here we are.
I think the Ukrainians didn't expect it either. Holly Hart.
Well, thank you. I'm just here also to listen, and I may have to leave early. There's a demonstration for Ukraine going on downtown a little later where I live. And I'm also really concerned about it. I guess I think I'm not with those people that say that it's entirely NATO's fault. I think there's some provocation, but I think it's like saying, you made me hit you. So I'm really very concerned about what's going on, and I'm hoping there's some way to force people to the table or entice people to the table in some kind of diplomatic resolution.
Where are you, by the way?
Oh, I'm in Iowa. I'm in Iowa City, and I work with I don't work for pay, but I with the U.S. Green Party, and then also I follow World Beyond War and local Veterans for Peace group. So you see where they're coming from. It's coming from that angle. Thank you for doing this, by the way. I may have to leave early, but I'm very glad you're doing this. This ought to be very instructive.
Well, we've already had a diversity of points of view already. Nothing very definitive. But
just on the level of factual information, I'd like to correct some, misinformation that is presently believed, on a wide scale. And that is, that there are no residential areas of the Ukrainian, residences that are being bombarded. The residences that are being bombarded are the eastern territories that are being hit by the Ukrainian military, led by the Azov Brigade. And the other piece of information that I could correct is that the Chernobyl, reactor meltdown, there. It's not operating, of course, so it doesn't have, electricity coming in. But it is being, the security is being guaranteed by the Russian troops and also the reactor security itself, the Ukrainians who work there. They're working together with the Russians to maintain the security of the place. The point is that it could not be allowed to be taken over by units of the Ukrainian military. You could use it as a weapon. It could be weaponized, to attack Russia. So that's eliminated now. If you don't believe in the existence of the neo-Nazi brigade, okay, you can, shake your head like that. But, I've seen the pictures of them, so, show me otherwise.
On the comments that have just been made, well, of course, these are identical to the comments that are putting out by the Russian propaganda sources at the moment. So I think we need to ground the conversation actually in some more reliable sources. In relation to neo-Nazism in Ukraine, I cited a couple of sources who aren't in complete agreement, but are saying that there is a problem, but it is not a problem that can justify the kind of action being taken by the Russians at the moment. As far as the nuclear issue is concerned, I'd suggest that people go and have a look at the work of James M. Acton, who is the Jessica T. Matthews Chair and Program Director for Nuclear Policy at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. There's a very good piece up there at the moment called
You
The Most
spell his
Immediate
name.
Nuclear Danger in Ukraine, in Chernobyl.
Simon,
Yeah.
will you spell his name, because nobody's going to read it.
James M. Acton, Acton,
Uh-huh.
and he's the co-director of the Nuclear Policy Program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace.
This is in the U.S.
That's
There's one
right,
in
Carnegie
London, in
Endowment.
Moscow
Yeah.
also.
It says Chernobyl is inside a large exclusion zone, and the uninhabited space would mitigate the consequences of a second nuclear accident there. But Ukraine's other reactors are not similarly isolated. Moreover, much of the fuel in those reactors is substantially more radioactive than the fuel at Chernobyl. To put it simply, nuclear power plants are not designed for war zones. It seems exceedingly unlikely that Moscow would authorize deliberate attacks on these facilities, but they could nevertheless become targets in a war that will in any case disrupt their operations. For Ukrainian nuclear power plant staff, merely traveling to work may be a dangerous act, making it potentially challenging to ensure that the reactor can be operated safely. And it then has a considerable amount of other information about the dangers that exist within that. So people were asking about that earlier, and hopefully that will be helpful.
Can you tell us where the other reactors are located? I'm only aware of the Chernobyl one.
I can't immediately tell them, but as I say, if you go to this article is called "The Most Immediate Nuclear Danger in Ukraine Isn't Chernobyl," James M. Acton. If you you get that, and then there will be further links there to other information. But
I think the 15 reactors producing electricity now, I saw a map showing them in 4 different locations, 4 different clumps of 2, 3, or 4. And those 15 are a great danger if any one of them became disabled or brought into a meltdown by what's happening. But I think, to me, while those are a great risk of bad nuclear things happening and damage happening within the Ukraine, I think, to me, the most significant risk and problem with what's happening in the Ukraine is to hone in on one sort of concisely, that in the last couple of years, and very recently, Russian generals have been considering more and more favorably the possibility that they could, quote, win a limited nuclear war. And I've just been trying to think myself, how could anyone do that? How would they win it and keep it limited, and that it could thereby spiral up to the leash launch of all of those nuclear weapons that the Russians and Americans have aimed at them, with the result that probably most of us here, what would happen sometime in the next 1 to 6 months could immediately simply vaporize.
Mhm.
More unlucky ones 10 to 20 miles away from one of those nuclear weapons might die a painful, tortured death over 1 to 5 days from mixture of burns and traumatic injuries with no medical treatment anywhere in sight. Picture yourself lying there with your abdomen ruptured and still alive. And then for those further away, maybe 1,000 miles away from the closest nuclear disaster, they would suddenly be left without, think of yourself tomorrow waking up with no power, no grocery store to go to, no gas stations. You've got your car maybe with some fuel in it left. The fact that it would now be winter and stay winter for the next 2 to 3 years. Therefore, you would be among the majority, most of the world, possibly all humans, who could starve to death. So one way or another, this could all actually be initiated within, well, in theory, tomorrow, but next 1 to 6 months, if this escalates to nuclear weapons. I think this is the chief concern, and all methods of reopening negotiations to settle things down so that particular thing won't happen are worth every possible effort that can be done.
I certainly have heard warnings, at least implied warnings to that effect from Putin in his statement about what the horrible things that have never happened in history are going to happen if we don't comply. So that's very much a concern. I think what we also haven't considered, but I've seen a reference to the fact that it is now expected by people in the Pentagon that the Russians will resort to significant use of cyber warfare in North America. I'm in Canada, and I don't know whether they're going to lock up my bank account or not. But some of the warnings that you've given about how if you don't have any money, what are you going to do? You can't get cash, and you can't check your bank account and things like that. That is much more probable, I would imagine. In fact, that's something we can talk about. What we assess as the most likely downturn in the current state of conflict.
Cyber war cannot destroy humanity, and most plant and animal life on Earth. Nuclear weapons can.
Okay, that's
on the note of the financial element. Have you seen the videos coming out of Russia of people panicking, and the lineups at the ATMs withdrawing funds today are going down the street and around the corner because they're cutting Russia off from the international SWIFT banking system.
Mm-hmm.
But every day, Russians, not the oligarchs, are panicking about where are they going to get the money if the banks crash. So they're withdrawing money now, and there's huge lineups at ATMs and banks withdrawing as much cash as they can. And another person was actually tracking, this is another interesting thing, the planes that belong to oligarchs. They noticed about half of the oligarchs have left Russia in the past week. Their planes that are registered under their names are all leaving the country. They're all leaving it within a day or two of the war being declared.
Very interesting. Didn't hear that before. Okay. Well, I mean, we've being told we should make, download or make paper copies of our financial records so that we at least know where, can show where our money was when the bank crashed, and withdraw money to keep around cash, because they're not just thinking it could happen, but they're kind of expecting it will happen if the war continues. It's already happening. They've already shut off banks in Ukraine, but it's the Russians doing that. How many people have done it to the Russians yet? I think it's a good question. Anyway, let's see. I believe, Richard, you had your hand up again.
Thank you very, very much, Meta. I think a couple of points. Again, go back to your excellent How to Save the World, and you look at the 6 methods there, and what one is war and one is radiation. And I think that, again, people forget about the radiation. They think that nuclear bombs are just another bigger, better bomb, but it's the radiation. And as Robert was talking about nuclear winter, the bombs putting soot up into the air, and then that stays up in the stratosphere for about 10 years and will block out the sun and then cause the famine and death by starvation. So I agree with Robert on that. The other thing was you had a guy here, Peters, who was saying that it was totally unexpected. And to me, this was not unexpected at all. But I think what has happened is due to COVID, is that, we're looking at the screen here in gallery view, we're all in our own little boxes. And we're in and you in particular, Meta, you haven't been out of the house in 2 years, or
Right.
your apartment. And so as a result, we have become very isolated. And as a result of that, we've been on that river there in Egypt. What's it called? Denial. And as a result of that, I think, I saw an interview on Wednesday in Kiev, and life was perfectly normal. People were driving around and walking up and down the sidewalk, and everything was perfectly normal. And so everybody was in this whole denial that a problem was going to happen. But when over here, the Americans have been saying that Putin was going to attack, and they said he was going to attack after the Beijing Olympics, and that's what has come to pass. And when you have huge armies massed, they're going to be used. Again, the military does not create security. The military, in fact, when you mass it together, it brings insecurity because it's then going to be used. And now you've got Putin and threatening the use of nuclear weapons. And I think this is the point, is that from a military point of view, Russia is no match for NATO and the US on a conventional basis. But the only thing that he does have is a whole lot of nuclear weapons. And when you look at India, Pakistan, it's the same scenario. India would love to get rid of its nuclear weapons if Pakistan did the same, because India's got the much superior conventional forces. Pakistan's minuscule militarily compared to India, but they both have the same number of nuclear weapons, and that so keeps it somewhat neutral. But you've now got Putin, who's destroying the Ukraine, and I would not put it past him that he would use tactical nuclear weapons if NATO got involved. And then, of course, tactical are the small nuclear weapons on the battlefield. But once you use them, then you're going to certainly escalate to the strategic, which are the large nuclear weapons that then completely destroy cities and, hundreds of thousands of civilians.
Thank you. Yes, it's very hardly encouraging. But Neovi, would you like to chime in?
I think Abraham was ahead of me.
Was he? All right. Abraham is. All
Yes,
right.
it's important to say that, there are no attacks on Ukrainian civilians. This is a whole hysteria with the migration of the refugees and all that. There is no proof. The only building that I saw damaged in any sort of, proof was one that was hit by a Ukrainian missile that was being launched against the Russian military. Now, the negotiations have not taken place, because Ukraine has rejected the proposals of Russia even though there was a ceasefire in place. This is not known here. It's not announced by the media that there was a ceasefire already. But when Ukraine refused to negotiate further along the lines of the demands that were being made by Russia with respect to the eastern territories, well, the war recommenced. So, like, this information is not available in the media here, and you don't know this. I get this, from Russia Today and some independent, media as well. But now today, I try to go to RussiaToday.com, and it's inaccessible. It's been cut off. England has officially cut off Russia Today, and other, Russian news media as well. Also, I think Poland. What does that mean to you? Does it mean anything? It means that the information is being withheld from you.
But the real problem is, how do you know what is valid information, even if it's put there, I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know. I think this is a chronic and forever problem. How much can you trust anybody anymore? And
Yeah.
the journalism is, I certainly have people I trust more than others. But anyway, let's go to Naomi.
Okay, thanks. Abraham, I'd like to follow up with what you said, because I just read that there is a movement to start some negotiations along the borders. This was posted today, and I put it in the chat. When you said there was a ceasefire, are you talking about today?
No.
Okay, because I don't think they've met yet. But as of today, which is, kind of a little bit of a relief, is that the Ukrainian president has agreed to meet not at Minsk, but somewhere at the border.
Mm.
Oh, very good. Yeah.
The Pripyat River, which is, on the border of Belarus. So I think he'd be inside Belarus, but not at Minsk. And I believe that Lukashenko has pledged to keep all planes on the ground, so that there will, the concern, of course, is whether or not they will entice Zelensky to Belarus and then kill him. And so I don't know how they're going to prove that they won't do that, but he's going, or somebody's going. Anyway. Who else wants to speak? Did you finish, Naomi, or go ahead?
Just one more point. I had, my understanding was that the US has 10 times more nuclear weapons than Russia, but that's neither here nor there.
They're equal. Nuclear weapons are equal.
Yeah, that's true.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
It's the non-nuclear military that's much stronger on the Western side, U.S. and NATO, much greater than Russian, non-nuclear.
Mm. Okay. So let me see. Liz, I believe you have your hand up. Mm-hmm.
Yes, hello. First of all, on RT, I can confirm that it's still alive and kicking here in Britain, both on TV, and I can get it on my computer as well. And I hope it stays there, because for the first time in my life, I'm actually interested to watch it and see what it is saying. And I think that's very important. It is often skewed and twisted and inaccurate, but it is important for us to know that. And to see what they're actually being fed in Russia, because we have lived in two different information worlds, and that's dangerous. We need to listen to what.
Have you been comparing what AB is saying with what the RT is saying? I haven't been watching RT, so maybe you can share your version of RT's reportage.
Well, interestingly, in the last couple of days, it's become much more balanced.
Really?
There are actually views apart from the view that Ukraine is under some kind of oppression that it needs to be freed from, which was, it was the Putin line. That was simply that on RT. but it's beginning. Some people on RT are actually beginning to express questioning of that, which is interesting. Another thing I wanted to say, rather different, but an aspect of this conflict, which people may not be entirely aware of, is an ecclesiastical church aspect. And it goes back to the fact that Kiev is the birthplace of Russian Orthodoxy. The conversion of Vladimir in 988 or thereabouts was the beginning of Russian Orthodoxy. And Kiev has ancient churches which are important in history. And in 2018, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church was recognized by the Ecumenical Patriarch in Constantinople. And as a consequence, the Russian Orthodox Church has excommunicated the whole of the Greek Orthodox Church. And part of cleaning up Kiev in Putin's mind is getting rid of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, which in his view is schismatic. So you might be interested to take that on board as part of the mix in Putin's mind.
Did you say the Greek? They've excommunicated the Greek Orthodox?
The Russians excommunicated the Greeks, yes. The Greeks.
I didn't even know that they had anything against the Greeks. What have the Greeks done that offends them?
They recognized the autocephalous, that is headed by itself, Ukrainian Orthodox Church, which according to Moscow should not exist.
Yeah. I remember being on a trip in Ukraine the same year of the coup took, about the same month that the coup took place. And the wildest, most bitter conflict that I observed was between different branches of the Orthodox Church. These people really didn't get along at all.
It would have been the Moscow Russians and the Ukrainian Orthodox.
Yeah, okay. Okay, Rose Dyson, hello.
I'd like to start with a couple of questions. I don't know what RC means. And being of Ukrainian descent myself, I just want to confirm what you're saying, Liz. And you're saying that the Greek and Ukrainian Catholic churches are the same, and those are the two that are distinct and different from Russian Ukrainian or Russian Orthodox?
We're talking about the Eastern Orthodox, not the Catholics at all.
No, I meant to say the Ukrainian Orthodox and the Greek Orthodox are the same and different from the Russian Orthodox. Is that the point you're making?
The Greeks, headed by the Ecumenical Patriarchate in Istanbul, Constantinople, yes, recognized the Ukrainian Orthodox as a newly independent branch of the Orthodox Church. The Moscow Patriarchate does not recognize it. And because the Greeks recognized it, they have excommunicated the Greeks and yes, declared them to be in schism.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And also, while we're on the subject of Ukraine and what's going on there, I've seen two different reports. One that came into my email box, and another in the Globe and Mail, yesterday's Globe, on Ukraine being extraordinarily resource-rich, and that being another reason for Putin's interest in controlling Ukraine, quite apart from his wanting to expand or reconstitute the former Soviet Union and so on. Anybody have any thoughts on that?
Do you remember what they say the resources are? I'm not sure what resources. Maybe Richard knows. Yeah.
Well, my understanding is, again, that Ukraine is a bit of a mess because the eastern side is Russian speaking people, and that does have the resources. The western side is the Ukrainian side, and they favor the West, and they are the breadbasket. So they're the agricultural area.
The implication in this article in the Globe is that all of Ukraine has some resources of one kind or another, and it's a conflict with Russia in many ways over the years that's prevented them from developing their own gas and oil resources, which are they're rich in as well. But the precise areas I can't comment on. I can't remember them offhand, but it's my understanding that these resources are sprinkled throughout the country, not only confined to the Donbass or eastern area.
Okay.
For Russia Today on the internet, I guess it's back up on Britain, but I have no access to it. So it's, and I frequently, have access tonight, not only to Russia Today, but also to Press TV from Iran. It's also problematic.
Yes, Russia RT is accessible here and on the TV as well. It's a regular free channel on TV.
Oh, that's good.
I really enjoy Al Jazeera when I think to turn it on, which I forget most of the time, but I find them quite reliable and I think more trustworthy than I really don't trust Russia Today. I have had friends who have worked for Russia Today who are well-known journalists in Russia who quit because they couldn't stand to work for an organization that was so clearly a tool of the party or the government. So it is not a very credible institution, but it's certainly worth listening to people you can't stand from time to time if you can hold your nose long enough. Here you go.
Back around 1990, Gorbachev on one side and Reagan and Bush Sr. on the other eliminated of 55,000 nuclear weapons, they eliminated 40,000, most of them, leaving just 15,000, which now exist with a little under 7,000 American, about 7,000 Russian, and less than 2,000 the other 7 nuclear weapons possessing countries combined. So since then, there's been this opportunity to eliminate the remaining 15,000. Under Clinton, with the Cold War gone, and it seemed unimportant. Bush Jr., the Republican, never would. But when Obama came to power, he had 6 or 7 main planks, one being his medical thing, but one of them, and he highlighted these when he made a trip and made about 10 international addresses in his first few months. And one of them concentrated on the elimination worldwide of nuclear weapons. This is one of the half dozen things on Obama's list of things to do. However, that still chair of the Republican part of the American Senate, McConnell, said he would try to block everything Obama wanted to do, and he did. Obama did manage to get through an attenuated medical health plan, but not too much else in his 6-part agenda, and certainly not eliminating nuclear weapons. So now the lament is that this just didn't happen before now, because if it had, and there were no nuclear weapons in the world, I think the American and NATO forces are so strong, they'd actually be in the Ukraine, even not just fighting off, but preventing the attack in the first place on the Ukraine by the Russians, by their overpowering forces, non-nuclear forces. So it's these nuclear weapons that typical Republican American senators thought, oh, these are defending us. This mad mutual, destruction is protecting us. Now, I think it's going to be used as a threat by Putin to just, what's the word? Two or three verbs. I'm trying to think of the best one, but who will blackmail, maybe that's not the best word, and threat his way with the threat of nuclear weapons to accomplishing a lot more harm in the world than he otherwise would. And hopefully those nuclear weapons don't just actually go off or we're done for.
And I'd like to sort of enlarge the perspective of this conversation, because one of the things that I'm hearing, many of the people writing about it are saying this is really the breakdown of the world order that had been relatively successful since the end of World War II in at least reducing the amount of conflict, violence, especially in Europe. And that this has been crumbling anyway. It's been under attack the last few years, but that this event in itself is going to prove that the whole set of assumptions that we've been living with about where the taboos lie and what you can and can't do is no longer viable, will not longer be taken for granted. So they're saying that this is opening the door to a variety of other challenges to the standards of international relations, that China, for example, will probably use it as a precedent and pick up on it, especially if it works, pick up on it in order to attack Taiwan. And you can think of other potential instances in which similar new infractions might occur. What I'm thinking is it, in your opinion, all of you, true that that the world order that we've been taking for granted, the standards of, for example, not attacking another country to claim its territory or challenge its sovereignty, that this has been violated, and that you can expect a new turning point in world affairs for the worse. And if so, can we think in terms of what new transnational system we could produce that would be more realistic and helpful?
Well, in terms of has the post World War II order been shattered? The idea, my response is no, I don't think it has. In fact, I think it's very interesting to see the way in which, at least in the West, and with the tacit approval of China at the moment, there's been a really strong and united reaction to what is a breach of the world order. Now, that may well result in a historical shift of some sort, but to say, I think it's far too much to say that the world order as we know it has been shattered. I don't think it has. I think many countries have rallied round to show their commitment to a world order of justice and of not attacking your neighbor for no particular reason. Mm-hmm. That's what I feel.
Okay, well, I'm glad you have an optimistic take on it. Naomi?
Yeah, I think it has shattered the world order many, many years ago, when the U.S. has had an aggressive foreign policy and has invaded countries and has gone against the UN Charter. And right now, China is not only harping on that. If you go to the channel that's from China or run by China, they are having a field day making fun of America and the fact that America is a land of turmoil and division and how they mistreat and jail their people, which is all true. So the other point I want to make is that up to now, NATO has not really been much of a power. And it's only now that people have come together. But behind the scenes, they have always pushed for expansion, which again is this is what it's brought us to. So I think that we definitely need to have a look at what's happening and who's holding power and how we can all get along. And NATO, the UN has just been too weak to do anything because it's been influenced mainly by the US and the other European powers. So something's got to go. Something has to change.
Well, I agree with what Liz was saying, that it would appear that Putin to some extent has miscalculated, and his threat or aggression on Ukraine has actually strengthened the democracies or the Democratic Alliance, and NATO's found it a new purpose and so on. Whether it holds remains to be seen. It's in America itself. There was something on CNN News this morning about the faction of the Republican Party actually meeting with white supremacists who were praising what Putin is doing, which is hard to believe, but evidently that was happening, at least the way it was, as I say, reported this morning on one American television station. And I agree with the previous speaker who said or pointed to the weakness in the UN, but how much influence is it the U.S. that's fostered or engineered the fact that the Security Council is constituted the way it is, with Russia actually, I think, being chair of it right now, in terms of the way they voted? That seems bizarre under the circumstances, any of them. I also wonder, given the fact that there hasn't been any breach in the move into Ukraine on the part of any of the Western democracies to support them, where the responsibility to protect doctrine comes in here, and why that would not have been useful in any way in providing the Ukrainians with a bit more support. And also in terms of what this means for the world in general, it's been suggested by a few people and journalists that if anything, the need for Germany in particular, all of Europe for that matter, to wean itself from Russian oil and gas can ironically have spur them on to quickly develop greener sources of energy. So I just put those thoughts out there.
Talking about news sources and how difficult it is, and I think you mentioned Al Jazeera, which I think is great. I'm also able to get Russia Today, and it's similar to the idea as to what others have said. As much as people may find this appalling, sometimes I do think that the independent news sources like Associated Press, Reuters do come up with, they may be biased to some degree, but I think that those who are fanatically interested in trying to be independent are generally good, and you can sift out what you can, especially in this day of, easily doctored photographs and that. But I say this as someone who tutored communications briefly and worked in broadcasting. But, otherwise, no, thank you. I'm finding this very interesting and just educational for myself. So thank you.
Hello, Charles Tober.
We are, first of all, not more than about 1,000 kilometers from Kiev here. That's pretty close. We are 200 meters or so from the Danube River, on the other side of which is Serbia, which is supporting the Russians.
We should tell people where you are first.
Sorry, it's a place
Vukovar.
called Vukovar, Vukovar in Croatia.
Mhm.
I'll write it in the chat.
Mhm.
This was one of the sites. This is the site of one of the first battles of the Yugoslav wars 30 years ago, in 1991. We also, Dodik, Milorad Dodik, who is the head of the Serbian entity of Bosnia, is supporting the Russians very clearly, and in
Really?
fact wants to create. He wants to create his own republic in Bosnia. He wants to break off. He's saying that he wants his own army. The way I see, yeah, exactly.
Woo.
And the Croats are also talking in the same way. So Bosnia may break up, and we may have another war here. Yeah. The other point is that nobody, as far as I can see, is doing any psychosocial work with the refugees, and this is going to require a long-term effort with these people. I got a call today from one of the Quakers. He happens to be in Georgia, but his wife and child are in Kiev. And we agreed that we would talk to some of the Quaker people and see what we can get together. But he is scared as all get out, as you can well imagine. And yeah. So I don't know what's going to happen. Now, there's another point I want to make.
Excuse me, but let me, because all of this is new to me, but it raises all kinds of questions about
Sure.
the position of the Serbs in Serbia as opposed to Bosnia. What is the Serbian? I haven't heard anything about what the Serbian government is saying, but there has been kind of this feeling that Serbia is really, it's sort of a relationship similar to the relationship of the Ukrainians to Russia, that they're our little brothers, or they're
Something like that. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. The Serbs consider themselves indeed to be little brothers of the Ukrainians. And that's, I would say, dangerous at
Sorry,
this point.
hold on. Of the Ukrainians or of the Russians?
Of the Russians, sorry.
Ah, okay. Yeah, that is dangerous. Okay.
And this is, yeah, we don't know what's going to happen tonight, let alone in the next few days. We're very worried. I can't say we aren't. Now, there's another point here, and that nobody is doing anything psychosocially with the refugees, at least not yet.
Well, it's got to be early. Just getting them some food and a place to sleep is the most urgent thing right now. You can't
Agreed.
expect psychotherapy to begin, can you?
No. Well, on an emergency basis, in a certain sense, yes, but nobody does anything with the psychosocial stuff anyway. I mean, we're now 27 years after the end of the Croatian-Bosnian War, the Balkan Wars, and still, this town is divided. There is no psychosocial work going on. Today in another group, we were talking about transgenerational transmission of trauma. And for example, here in Vukovar, there is virtually no work on that with either the former soldiers or the young people who are getting the transmission. Now, still another point in all of this. Because of the Ukrainian situation, we are not talking about Afghanistan. We are not talking about Ethiopia. We are not talking about South Sudan. We are not talking about the Uyghurs. And I could go on for the next hour about who we are not.
And we're not talking about climate. Right. We're not even talking about COVID anymore.
Exactly. Exactly. And and make no mistake, COVID also is going to provide its own psychological issues. It already has done. And so we are going out of our bleeding heads at the moment, my colleague and I, and we really don't know quite how to handle it. I'm working from 6 or 7 in the morning until midnight or 1. I'm not getting anything done that I need to write. We have lots of groups. So I'm almost saying, help, but this is the point.
Mhm.
This
We
is the
should-
way the world is.
I need to tell people, those who don't know you, that you are a psychotherapist working with the survivors of war trauma in Vukovar, and that you organize people elsewhere around the world to also serve as psychotherapists for people in states of trauma, so that if anybody wants to become a barefoot therapist, you're the man who can train them and take care and help them get going. Is that still a fair way of putting it?
That's a very fair way of putting it. And we'd be happy to hear, when I'm finished talking, I will put our email and website and my WhatsApp in the chat. And so anybody.
Don't put
wants to
anything
know-
in the chat. It won't help. Tell us, say it, and then people will
Okay.
get it.
Okay, it's cwwppsummer@gmail.com. That's the email.
Okay. Thank you.
And the website is www.cwwpp.org. And my WhatsApp, Viber, whatever you want to have it, is +385 98346 753. And people are very welcome to contact me, and anything you want, we'll discuss. We'll make.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Okay. You're doing wonderful work. It's very, very important.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Like Poland and Hungary, the people are helping out with the refugees from Ukraine right now, providing shelter and food and stuff. But when it came to refugees coming from Africa, or, I'm not sure if it was Afghanistan, that they shut their borders, Hungary. And I think it has a lot to do with racism, I hate to say, but
Yeah.
that's the way I see it.
Mhm.
A lot
No,
of
we had that discussion earlier today. There's a great deal of racism with regard to this, with regard to the Arab refugees, with regard to the Afghanistan refugees, with regard to the Syrian refugees. The whole way the European Union is approaching this with this closed border policy is absolutely horrible. And the way the pushbacks are going from Greece, this country, Croatia, everywhere, it's extremely violent. These pushbacks, people are getting killed and injured very badly.
But so
Ukraine borders on Hungary. Ukraine borders on Hungary, and it borders on Romania. And
yes. Well, now are Romania and Hungary accepting refugees? We hear a lot about the Poles, that they're very welcoming, but how are they treating are there any refugees coming into Hungary and Romania?
there are, but the question is what the European Union is going to do about this. And that's a big question, because the European Union's approach to other refugees has been despicable. I don't know what other word to use. It's been absolutely awful.
Well, but we're talking about racism, right? That there's certain people they don't want, so they're not so friendly, especially if, with those people were imported deliberately by Lukashenko just to make trouble. So you can sort of see they have some point on their side for that argument. But the Ukrainians are people that you would think they would especially want to sympathize with and be welcoming toward. Why not? Why would they not welcome the Ukrainians? I don't know.
Of course, the route is wide open through Poland to Canada.
Yeah.
Which is
Also, the Canadian,
which is streamlined its immigration details for the Ukrainians.
Is that right? I hadn't heard about that. Well, that makes sense because we have the largest Ukrainian population outside of Ukraine, apparently. So, and I'm keen to, I bet Chrystia Freeland was pretty instrumental in getting things sped up to let Ukrainian refugees into the country, bless her heart, on that one. Anyway.
That's in contrast to Canada's not being so quick to get the Afghan people over. And this is another example of how, I mean, I'm not against Ukrainians. I'm just saying they are white. They have a lot of support all over North America. They are just so much have an advantage.
You're right. Absolutely. Rose Dyson, our one Ukrainian here.
Yeah. Well, half Polish actually, but I think you're right that Chrystia Freeland has done a lot to mobilize Canadian support and response in one way or another, and in terms of trying to help the refugees to the extent that we can on this side of the ocean. We're a long way off. It seems the Ukrainian Canadian diaspora community is really mobilized to raise money, and I think the cell phone charges, for example, for transatlantic calls and so on, have been waived for anybody in Canada trying to call Ukraine. So there has been a fair bit of, I think, response to the extent that we're able to so far away at the moment. And from the news coverage I've been seeing, Romania and Hungary, as I guess has already been pointed out, are taking in refugees, and there's been quite a bit said about how quickly they have managed to pull together the sorts of things that people crossing the border after walking for miles need, like food and something to drink and a ride to a warm bed somewhere.
Right.
Focuses on the right-wing Ukrainian organizations in Canada that derived from the collaborators of the Nazis in the Second World War, who came and were brought over into Canada, and they're being publicly funded now as well. And this is a problem in Canada, and is probably one of the constituent organizations in the right-wing populist movement as well that have taken control of the capital of Ottawa.
That is nonsense.
Well, I would think so too. I mean, I know
research
people.
is there. Just go and see it at the website there. All the research is there. I'm sorry.
It is nonsense on the website.
Well,
Canada.
You wouldn't categorize Chrystia Freeland as being one of these people, would you? And I mean, I have relatives on the prairies who are involved in some of these communities, and I can assure you that they're not Nazis.
yes, okay, for sure. There's left-wing Ukrainians as well, but there's your right-wing Ukrainian organizations that are publicly funded that were brought over, after the Second World War, when they were occupied by the Red Army. So, nonetheless, they're still right.
The huge Canadian population of Ukrainians came around 1900 before and after. They created a lot of the farming populations in Saskatchewan, for instance. That's old history. What you're saying about being brought over by Nazis or something's pure hallucination.
Yeah, my ancestors came around the turn of the last century, as Robert's pointing out.
Yes, and then what about the the collaborators with the Nazis in Ukraine? Did they not exist? Is that what you were saying?
A few of them consisted in every country, a few Nazi, but not in Canada, very few in Canada. It's
Well, they weren't brought
insignificant.
into Canada like the scientists and all the engineers and all the other Nazis that were used by the CIA to start the Cold War. That didn't happen either? Really?
The Americans brought in a few German scientists who knew the most about nuclear weapons to develop their Manhattan Project, but nothing beyond that. Idiocy that any Nazis were brought over by whatever in North America.
Yeah, they called it Operation Paperclip. That was the CIA name for it. They used them, they, set up an alliance, with them to fight against communism. Yes, that's what it was all about. And the proof is there at the website, like 10 years of research, by Richard Sanders. If you don't think it's true, then disprove it.
So Richard Sanders is your source. I see. Okay. Explains a lot.
I don't care what else he is, but he's done the research. And I support the petition. I don't want that here.
In any event, 24 hours ago, I heard the Canadian Minister of Immigration, Sean Fraser, from a small Nova Scotia town, being interviewed about the fact that he's been working practically 24/7 the last 2 months to reach what he's pretty well reached, just trying to streamline any Ukrainians getting into Poland or Hungary or those 2 or 3 other eastern countries that border the western part of the Ukraine, to zip right into Canada with hardly a few hours, and they're on their way.
So it's
now, why haven't they done the same thing for the Afghans? That's all I can say. I mean, it is true that
they have for the Afghans. The ones who are still there are caught and aren't being able to get out because of the ruling. What do you call it? The Taliban.
Robert, there are Afghans. There are Afghans in Croatia, Serbia, Hungary, all through Eastern Europe, through the UK, France, and I could go on. There are Syrians all over the place.
But
they are being treated. Wait a minute, Robert.
Okay.
They are being treated horribly. They are mistreated everywhere.
The ones in controversy for Canada are the ones who worked with Canadians while the Canadians were there. A specific 40,000 or so of them, a specific certain ones. And those are the ones that are fast-tracked as fast as they can get out of Afghanistan or into Canada.
Well, Richard, Robert, I believe that I've seen a lot of evidence to the contrary, that there are people who did risk their lives for Canadians and who simply are put in a shelf someplace and they can't get into Canada the way they should. I really like it if somebody else knows about this so that we can settle what I think is a real dispute between Robert and me on that. And I don't know anybody else who knows anything about it, but I did speak yesterday to Lloyd Axworthy, as a matter of fact, and I said, because he's the head of the World Council on Migrants and Refugees, or Refugees and Migrants, or whatever, and we talked about that problem, that the Afghans are not being brought in as quickly as they should, even though they did a lot for Canadians when Canadian troops were there and so on.
Meta, may I make one quick plug?
Yeah.
There is a marvelous marvelous, but they're very good particularly if you're a chocolate addict like I am. There is an organization in Nova Scotia called Peace by Chocolate. And the head of it is from Damascus, a guy called Tariq Hadhad, and he has set up an organization where he is employing Syrian refugees to make chocolate and to give language lessons. And it's costing me a bloody fortune, but I just ordered a huge amount of chocolate from him to be sent over to Croatia, just because this is one of these social enterprise things that is really supporting refugees, and I would recommend people to support him. He's in Antigonish, Nova Scotia.
He's
So,
well known in Nova Scotia. He's a popular person. He's an immigrant from Syria who had a chocolate factory there and has one in Antigonish, and he promotes them as chocolates for peace. And it's a well thought of, supported organization, and a successful one here in Nova Scotia and in Canada. Yes, indeed.
well,
Before we get off topic, I really want to bring up another
I'm sorry.
very, very important, and that is, what about the threat that we have now in Canada, that Canada is going to go whole crazy about getting more weapons and supporting and purchasing those fighter jets for billions and billions of dollars, because now there's so much more, enthusiasm for let's get more armaments. We've got to fight this, this impending, this kind of potential for Russia to really become a war part, another enemy, reviving the Cold War and all of that. I think it's really a danger. And I'm not sure if anybody's been writing about it. Haven't read anything, but I did hear somebody the other day say, well, I wish we'd get those fighter jets. Let's go. I think it was one of the members of parliament, actually. And, it's just absolutely, we've been fighting against this for so long. For the last, I don't know how many, 5 years, we've been saying, do not buy these fighter jets. And the United States is, doing it. So Canada should do it. Isn't that
Europe is doing it too. Europe is doing the same thing.
They've been in the process, Canada has, of buying those same 35 planes for about 20 or 30 years. And there's certainly a lot of us who've been voicing advocacy against them doing that, all the other things they could do with that money. Absolutely agree with you that those shouldn't be done.
Right. But I mean, I'm talking about the whole atmosphere that's being created now with Putin becoming so much more aggressive, and, NATO is going to need more armaments and missiles and whatever.
It's not the only thing that's happening, though. There's a little bit more talk about the notion of common security. There are people who are saying, well, you can sort of understand why both sides, the Russians are afraid of the Ukrainians and the Ukrainians are afraid of the Russians. And unless they recognize that neither one can be secure without helping to make the other side secure, then we will continue this violence. And, this is the first time I actually heard anybody use the word common security for something like 20 years. It's not since Gorbachev days when we often talked about our common European home. I think that was his language for it. You don't hear people talking that much. But now I've heard a few people say, well, the only real answer to it is to come up with a solution that would be based on the notion of common security. I think the Minsk agreements originally would have been one that took account, at least recognized that there was some basis for Russia to feel threatened by the ever encroaching movement of NATO, and to feel that for Ukraine to be admitted to NATO would be a real threat to their security. So taking that into account meant that the Minsk agreement would have made NATO into, I guess you'd say, kind of a neutral country. Whether it would work now, I'm not so sure, but I wouldn't personally discount it. The Russians basically say has to be sort of the basis for any kind of agreement. And I think it's be worthwhile for us to think of terms of what we would recommend ourselves as the most promising solution to the problem, right now. If you were in charge of, if you could actually hold a meeting with Putin and Zelensky and then say, let's find an answer that everybody will live with, what would it look like?
If they could meet and agree to Minsk with the details bargained out, that could possibly be a solution.
Do other people think so too? I just about 2 hours ago put my name on a petition saying, yes, it was a Pugwash statement that we're writing. I'm a member of Pugwash, the Canadian group, and it had some recommendations, but it didn't mention Minsk. And somebody else said, well, let's say, consider Minsk. And I said, I would agree. But then somebody else said, no, that wouldn't work anymore because Minsk was adopted when the Ukrainians basically had a gun at their head. They pretty much had to, and they have not been willing to implement it ever since. That is, by the way, the position of the two people that I interviewed who really knew what went on in that period. The next issue of Peace Magazine will include 2 long transcripts of interviews that I did with Alexander Lichotal, who has always been Gorbachev's closest advisor, I would say. Now that Gorbachev is really quite old, they don't see each other or talk that much, but he's been a very close advisor. And Pavel Palashchenko, who was his interpreter and still is a very close person to him at the Gorbachev Foundation. And both of them did not, I mentioned the notion of making Ukraine into sort of an Austria, a Finland or Austria type neutral country. And both of them felt, well, if there was ever a time for that, it had passed long ago. But, I'm not sure what else there is left in our little toolkit. And if anybody has any good ideas of things that could be adopted as a solution, I'd like to hear it. Richard.
Yeah. I'll come back to follow up on just what you've been talking about and also the global order and that sort of thing. I think what the pandemic has shown is that global problems, be it the climate crisis, nuclear weapons, radiation, all your 6 on how to save the world in a hurry, have pointed out that these are all global problems that the military is unable to handle. And certainly, but the psychology is that whenever there's a problem, we look to a father figure, and the military is often that, quote, father figure. And it gives the illusion that our governments are doing something. So whether it's a big snowfall in Toronto or with the pandemic calling the military into the nursing homes, which they were certainly not equipped to handle, and they weren't even given the proper N95 masks, so all the soldiers came down with COVID here in Ontario. So I think the thing is that from me as a medical doctor, I call it personal security. The United Nations calls it human security. And then if you're talking to environmentalists, they call it planetary security. Mm-hmm. And I think that is where the New World Order has to go, is to addressing what I call personal, human, planetary security, and putting the money to address health problems to be into the prevention, as opposed to spending the billions of dollars that is going to the military. And I think when you look at the Ukraine now, the West was threatening Russia by having the Ukraine join NATO, even though in the NATO Constitution, that would have been illegal. And
Sorry, I don't want to interrupt too much, but what would have made it illegal? I'm not aware of that.
Yeah, it's my understanding that NATO was not, well, number one, with Gorbachev Reagan, NATO was not supposed to move east. And number two, NATO was not to invite any country that's bordering with Russia.
In the Constitution of NATO, it says that?
Well, again, I could be wrong on that. So
Okay, well, I hadn't heard that.
I have heard that.
Okay,
So have I.
really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So
That was only a verbal agreement, which the Russians took very seriously, but the West didn't.
Which agreement was it, Liz, again, please?
That after the Cold War ended, NATO would not expand towards the east. That
But-
was a verbal agreement. But
Oh, yes, that
more than a
agreement
verbal
between,
agreement, though.
yes, Baker and Gorbachev. Yeah,
But it's more than a verbal agreement. It was written down in many other papers, to my understanding, that quote agreement. But I think the problem is that when you have military and you bring them together, that actually creates fear and mistrust, and therefore leads to war. And what you need to do is create trust by having relationships and looking at the root problems and solving the problems with negotiation. You know, I think if NATO hadn't threatened Russia with getting Ukraine to join it, this would not have happened.
has it, one would prefer not to begin from here, but where we are is a state of profound distrust between at least the Russian government and the West. And it's because that we missed so many opportunities after the Cold War to really build understanding and trust and friendship between East and West. We needn't have got into this position, but we have, and Putin embodies the distrust and the resentment at not being welcomed into Western society, which many Russians did feel after the Cold War, and it has not healed yet, and we need to heal that.
absolutely. That's a very important angle to take on that, and I think it'd be profitable to have a whole conversation about what to do with people who have resentments, because I think the conflict is often, the Marxist analysis would say it's over material conditions, but I think it's almost always over a sense of deprived status and the resentment of the Russian population. A lot of people is very, very noticeable. If you have any contacts in Russia, you'll run into it all the time. People who feel you're abusing them or likely to look down on them or something.
Exactly. It is the basis for all kinds of terrible things happening. I think this is a very good way to end, actually. I like what you said, Liz. It's really, it goes together with what Richard was just saying, and the trauma also. We haven't got time to heal everybody from their trauma and their resentments, and we've got to do something, much more concrete right now, and that is to offer some kind of negotiating, like really serious, but it's past that. We've already started, a real war. It's just overwhelming.
Niovi, I think you have your hand up, and I'll say that's going to be the last word we'll give you.
Okay, it might sound simplistic, but starting with who hates whom, I think that the world right now, because of the history of imperialism by the US hates the US. And the US hates China because nobody else can have power except for the US. So until we get rid of NATO, until we get rid of nuclear arms, and until we do have some kind of new world order, whether it's revamping the UN, where everybody's vote is equal, not run by the, white people, we're not going to get anywhere. So I think we have a lot of work ahead of us. I think it has to start from people. It has to start from the West, because we're the ones that have dominated the world. And now we're realizing more and more, population-wise, economic-wise, we're not at the top anymore.
Thank you. Well, you've given us an agenda. So come back in 1 month, and each of you have an assignment. Come back with a game plan for how to reconstitute the world order. So what kind of structure do we all need, and what kind of changes shall we make in this new world order? And it's going to assure our future and our security and our human happiness and well-being. So we have an assignment to do. We have a month to do it. So put on your thinking cap and get to work, folks. Okay? I'll see you in a month. Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Project Save the World produces one of these shows 3 days a week and sometimes more. This is episode number 419. You can watch them or listen to them as audio podcasts on our website, tosavetheworld.ca. Eventually, we even post the transcripts there. When you get to the website, do look around, because we have conversations going on there all the time about 6 global issues, plus potential reforms in governance, economics, and civil society. To find a particular talk show, enter its title or episode number in the search bar, or the name of one of the guest speakers. After you've watched or listened, scroll down and share your thoughts about the show with the other viewers. This is a place for dialogue, so please join in. See you there.